Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for clicking on this video, for choosing to spend the next 30 minutes with me. When you subscribe, it tells me that my story matters, that someone out there wants to listen. Now, let me tell you what happened that night when I got ill and my husband gave me medicine. The pills were small and white, perfectly round and innocuous looking, the kind you might take for a headache or allergies without thinking twice. Daniel handed them to me with a glass of water, and that smile, the one that used to make me feel safe, the one I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago when we'd met at a bookstore in Alexandria, Virginia. "Here, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle and concerned. "The doctor said these will help with your anxiety. You've been so stressed lately, and I hate seeing you suffer like this." I looked down at the pills in my palm. 2 of them, smooth and uniform, manufactured to exact specifications in some pharmaceutical plant. I'd been taking them for 3 weeks now, ever since my appointment with Dr. Gerald Brennan, the psychiatrist Daniel had insisted I see after what he called my episodes. And for 3 weeks, I'd been feeling progressively worse, more tired, more disconnected, like I was moving through the world underwater, watching life happen through thick glass. But I smiled at Daniel, the smile I'd perfected over the past months, the one that said everything was fine even when nothing was. "Thank you for taking care of me." I brought the glass to my lips, tilted my head back, and pretended to swallow. The pills stayed tucked under my tongue, bitter and chalky, already starting to dissolve. I took another sip of water, making a show of swallowing again, then set the glass down on the nightstand beside our bed. "Good girl," Daniel said, kissing the top of my head. His lips felt cold against my hair. "Get some rest now. I'll be downstairs if you need me. I've got some client work to catch up on." I nodded, already sinking back against the pillows, playing the part of the drowsy, medicated wife. He watched me for a moment longer, and I kept my eyes half closed, my breathing slow and even. Finally, satisfied, he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I waited until I heard his footsteps on the stairs, counting each one. 14 steps from our bedroom to the first floor. Then I sat up, grabbed a tissue from the box on my nightstand, and spit the pills into it. They'd dissolved partially, leaving a bitter residue in my mouth that I washed away with more water. I wrapped the tissue carefully and shoved it deep into the trash can beside the bed, burying it under other tissues and receipts. I don't know exactly what made me do it. Maybe it was the way Daniel had been watching me lately, too closely, too intently, like a scientist observing an experiment. Maybe it was the way Dr. Brennan's office had felt wrong from the first appointment too. Sterile and impersonal, more like a stage set than a real medical practice. Maybe it was the way my thoughts had grown increasingly cloudy over the past 3 weeks, my memory full of gaps and confusion I couldn't explain. Or maybe it was just instinct, some primal part of my brain that recognized danger, even when I couldn't consciously name it. Whatever the reason, I'd stopped trusting the pills, and tonight, I'd stopped taking them. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Reston, Virginia, in a house we'd bought 5 years ago when Daniel's financial planning business really took off. It was a beautiful home, a 4-bedroom colonial with hardwood floors and crown molding and a backyard that backed up to a small wooded area, the kind of house people drove past and imagined happy families living in. And for a long time, we had been happy. Or at least I thought we had been. Daniel was successful and ambitious, building his client list through networking and reputation. I was a freelance writer, working from home, managing a modest but steady career writing articles for parenting blogs, lifestyle websites, and the occasional magazine feature. We had friends, a book club I belonged to, neighbors we had over for barbecues in the summer. Our life looked perfect from the outside. But for the past 6 months, that perfect life had started to crack. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice at first. Daniel questioning my memory, telling me I'd said things I hadn't, insisting I'd forgotten conversations we'd never had. He'd look at me with concern, his brow furrowed, and say things like, "Emma, we talked about this last week, don't you remember?" Or, "You promised you'd do this. You're getting so forgetful lately." At first, I thought I was just stressed and distracted. I'd been working on a big project, a series of articles about financial planning for young families, ironically enough. But the more it happened, the more I started to doubt myself. Was I forgetting things? Was I losing track of conversations and commitments? Then it escalated. Daniel started pointing out mistakes I supposedly made. Appointments I'd allegedly missed, bills I'd supposedly forgotten to pay, phone calls I'd apparently failed to return. Except when I checked, the appointments were on different days than he said, the bills were paid on time, the phone calls had been returned. But when I tried to show him, he'd get upset, accusing me of being defensive, saying I was trying to rewrite history to make myself look better. I started keeping notes, writing down conversations and commitments in a private journal. But even that started to feel crazy, like I was becoming paranoid, like maybe Daniel was right, and I was losing my grip on reality. The worst part was that he did it all with such concern, such loving worry. He wasn't angry or cruel. He was gentle and patient, like he was dealing with someone fragile, someone who needed to be handled carefully. And that almost made it worse because I couldn't point to any specific moment and say, that was abuse. It was all so subtle, so insidious. Then came the night he suggested I see a psychiatrist. We were sitting in the living room, and I'd been trying to explain to him that I'd never agreed to host a dinner party he'd apparently invited 3 couples to. I had no memory of the conversation, no record of it in my calendar or my notes. But Daniel insisted we'd discussed it 2 weeks ago, that I'd been enthusiastic about it. "I'm really worried about you, Emma," he'd said, taking my hands in his. "This is getting worse. The memory problems, the confusion, the defensiveness. I think you might need professional help. There's no shame in it. We all need help sometimes." I'd been so tired, so confused, so desperate to understand what was happening to me that I'd agreed. And Daniel had set up the appointment for the very next day with Dr. Brennan. I should have questioned how quickly he'd managed to get an appointment with a psychiatrist. Most had waiting lists that stretched for weeks or months, but I was too far down the rabbit hole of self-doubt to think clearly. Dr. Brennan's office was in a small professional building in Tyson's Corner. It was decorated blandly with generic landscape paintings on the walls and furniture that looked like it had come from an office supply catalog. Dr. Brennan himself was a thin man in his 50s, with rimless glasses and a clinical demeanor that felt cold rather than professional. He asked me questions about my mood, my sleep patterns, my relationship with Daniel. I answered honestly, telling him about the memory problems, the confusion, the feeling that I was losing track of myself. I told him how worried I was, how scared I felt that something was seriously wrong with my mind. He barely took notes. He just nodded occasionally, his expression unchanging. After maybe 20 minutes, he pulled out his prescription pad. "Anxiety and mild depression," he said, writing quickly. "These symptoms you're describing are very common. The memory issues, the confusion, the stress, they're all related to your mental state. These pills will help stabilize you, help you think more clearly." "What are they?" I'd asked. "A mild anti-anxiety medication combined with a mood stabilizer," he'd said, handing me the prescription. "Start with 2 pills in the evening. They may make you drowsy at first, but that will pass." I'd taken the prescription to the pharmacy that same day, and I'd started taking the pills that night. Daniel had seemed relieved, like everything would be better now that I was getting help. But everything got worse. The fog in my mind deepened. I started sleeping 10, 12 hours a day, dragging myself through my waking hours in a haze. My writing suffered. I missed deadlines, lost track of projects, couldn't seem to string coherent sentences together. And the memory problems got worse, not better. Whole hours would disappear, and I'd find myself in rooms with no idea how I'd gotten there. Daniel was endlessly patient, endlessly supportive. He took over more of the household responsibilities, did the grocery shopping, made the meals. He reminded me to take my pills every night, handing them to me with water and that concerned smile. And he watched me, all the time. I started to feel his eyes on me constantly, assessing, evaluating, waiting for something. That's what made me stop taking the pills tonight. That feeling of being watched, being monitored, being managed. That and the conversation I'd had with my sister 3 days ago. Rebecca lived in North Carolina, and we talked on the phone every couple of weeks. I'd been putting off calling her because I knew I sounded off, knew she'd noticed something was wrong. But she'd called me, and I couldn't avoid it. "Emma, you sound terrible," she'd said bluntly. Rebecca had never been one to sugarcoat things. "What's going on? Are you sick?" "I'm fine," I'd said automatically. "Just tired. I've been taking some medication for anxiety." "Since when do you have anxiety?" she'd asked. "You've always been the most level-headed person I know." And something about hearing her say that, hearing someone who'd known me my entire life describe me the way I used to be, had cracked something open inside me. I'd started crying, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and terrifying. "I don't know what's happening to me," I'd sobbed. "I can't remember things. I can't think straight. Daniel says I need help, that I've been getting worse, but I don't feel like myself anymore." There'd been a long pause. Then Rebecca had said, very carefully, "Emma, I need you to listen to me. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. Has Daniel been giving you these pills himself, or are you getting them from the pharmacy?" "He picks them up from the pharmacy," I'd said. "Why?" "Because I want you to check the bottle," she'd said. "Make sure the name on it is actually yours, that it's from an actual pharmacy. And Emma, I want you to consider not taking them for a few days. See if you feel any different." "Rebecca, that sounds crazy. You think Daniel is drugging me or something?" "I think something isn't right," she'd said firmly. "And I think you know it too, or you wouldn't be crying like this. Just promise me you'll be careful. And if you need me, if you need anything at all, you call me, day or night." I'd promised, and we'd hung up, and I'd gone to look at the pill bottle. It had my name on it, Emma Voss, and it listed Dr. Gerald Brennan as the prescriber. The pharmacy was a chain pharmacy about 10 minutes from our house. Everything looked legitimate, but Rebecca's words had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. And tonight, when Daniel handed me the pills, I'd made a split-second decision not to take them. Now, lying in bed in the dark, I waited. I kept my breathing, slow and even, feigning sleep. About an hour after he'd left the room, I heard Daniel come back upstairs. He opened the bedroom door quietly, and I sensed him standing there, watching me. After a long moment, he approached the bed and leaned down close. "Emma?" he whispered. I didn't move, didn't respond. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He straightened up and left the room, closing the door again. I heard him go back downstairs, and then I heard his voice, muffled but distinct. He was on the phone. I waited another 15 minutes, making sure he was settled. Then I got up slowly, carefully, avoiding the floorboards I knew creaked. I crept to the bedroom door and opened it just a crack, just enough to hear. Daniel was in his office downstairs, the door slightly ajar. I could hear him clearly now. "She's out," he was saying. "Took the pills like always. Brennan was right. This dosage is perfect. She'll be knocked out for hours, completely compliant." There was a pause while whoever was on the other end responded. I know, Daniel continued, and his voice had changed. The gentle, concerned tone was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "But it's taking longer than we thought. Brennan said it should only take another week or two of the increased dosage. The more confused and unstable she gets, the easier it'll be to have her committed." My blood turned to ice in my veins. I gripped the door frame to keep from collapsing. "Once she's in the facility, we can move forward," he said. "The house is in both our names, but with her declared mentally incompetent, I'll have full control of everything. Her accounts, her assets, everything. And then, well, you and I can finally stop hiding." Another pause. "Don't worry about the money," Daniel said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She's been freelancing for years, building up a nice nest egg. Plus, there's her inheritance from her father. Once I have legal control, it's all ours. Probably close to 400,000 total. 400,000. My savings, my inheritance, money my father had left me when he died 3 years ago with the hope that I'd use it to build something meaningful. Daniel was planning to steal all of it. "I love you too," Daniel said. "This will all be over soon, and we can be together without any complications. Just a little longer." He ended the call, and I heard him moving around downstairs. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and got back into bed, my mind racing, my body shaking. Daniel was trying to have me committed. He was drugging me, making me think I was losing my mind, working with that psychiatrist to build a case that I was mentally incompetent. And there was someone else, someone he loved, someone he was planning a future with using my money. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I forced myself to lie still, to breathe normally, to think. If I confronted him now, he'd deny everything. He'd say I was confused, paranoid, delusional. He'd probably say I'd stopped taking my medication, that I was having a breakdown. And who would believe me? My own doctor, the one Daniel had found for me, was part of the conspiracy. I had no proof, no evidence, just my word against his. And I'd spent the last 3 weeks appearing increasingly unstable, increasingly confused, building exactly the case Daniel wanted. I needed evidence. I needed proof. And I needed to stay calm and keep playing along while I gathered it. The next morning, I acted exactly as I had been acting for the past 3 weeks. Groggy, confused, compliant. I shuffled downstairs in my bathrobe and sat at the kitchen table while Daniel made breakfast. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "Tired," I said, which was true despite not actually taking the pills. The adrenaline from what I'd overheard had kept me awake most of the night. "But okay." "Good," he said, smiling. "The medication is helping, I can tell. You seem calmer." I nodded and picked at my eggs. Daniel sat across from me with his coffee and his tablet, reading the news like this was a normal morning in a normal marriage. After he left for work, I started planning. The first thing I did was call Rebecca from my cell phone, going into the backyard where I was sure I wouldn't be overheard. "I need help," I said as soon as she answered. "You were right. Something is very wrong." I told her everything. The phone call I'd overheard, Daniel's plan to have me committed, the psychiatrist who was helping him, the woman he was involved with. Rebecca listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. "Jesus, Emma," she finally said. Okay, we need to get you out of there. Can you come stay with me?" "Not yet," I said. "If I leave now..." He'll know I'm on to him. He'll have time to destroy evidence, to get his story straight. I need to document everything first. I need proof. This is dangerous, Rebecca said. He's drugging you. He's planning to have you committed. Who knows what he'll do if he figures out you're onto him? I know, I said, but I have to do this right. I need evidence that will hold up, that will prove what he's been doing. Otherwise, it's just my word against his, and I'm the one who's been acting unstable for weeks. Rebecca made me promise to call her every day, to let her know I was safe. Then she gave me the name of a lawyer, a woman she knew through a friend who specialized in family law and fraud. Her name is Patricia Winters, Rebecca said. She's in D.C. I'll call her today and explain the situation. You call her as soon as you can. After we hung up, I went back inside and started searching. I had to be careful, had to make sure everything looked exactly as Daniel had left it. I started with his office. I found more pill bottles in his desk drawer, hidden in the back behind office. Supplies. They had my name on them, from the same pharmacy, prescribed by Dr. Brennan. But the dosages were different from what was on the bottles Daniel had been giving me. These bottles showed a much lower dose, while the ones he'd been handing me nightly were significantly stronger. He'd been having the prescriptions filled, then tampering with them somehow, giving me stronger doses than what was prescribed. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking. I also found financial records, bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed, all in Daniel's name only. He'd been moving money out of our joint account for months, small amounts that I probably wouldn't have noticed even if I'd been thinking clearly. But it added up. He'd already taken nearly $30,000. There were also emails, printed out and filed away, messages between Daniel and someone named Simone Marshall. The emails were more careful than the phone conversation I'd overheard, but the subtext was clear. They'd been involved for at least a year, and they were making plans for their future together. Plans that didn't include me. I photographed all of it, then put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Over the next week, I became an actress in my own life. Every night, Daniel handed me the pills, and every night I pretended to take them. I tucked them under my tongue, waited until he left the room, then spit them out and flushed them down the toilet. And every day, I felt clearer, stronger, more like myself. But I continued to act foggy and confused. I pretended to forget conversations, to lose track of time, to need Daniel's help with simple tasks. And all the while, I was gathering evidence. I bought a small voice recorder and hid it in the office, capturing more of Daniel's phone conversations. He called Simone almost every night, and the recordings were damning. They discussed their plans in detail. Once I was institutionalized, Daniel would have power of attorney over my affairs. He'd sell the house, liquidate my accounts, and he and Simone would move to South Carolina, where she had family. They'd start over with my money, free and clear. I also managed to get Daniel's phone one afternoon while he was in the shower. He'd left it on the kitchen counter, and I quickly went through his messages and emails, forwarding the most incriminating ones to my own email account. And I researched Dr. Brennan. I found that his medical license had been suspended in Pennsylvania in 2018 for falsifying patient records and insurance fraud. He'd moved to Virginia and somehow gotten licensed again, but there were multiple complaints filed against him with the Virginia Board of Medicine. Complaints about unethical practices, about prescribing unnecessary medications, about working with family members to have patients declared incompetent so they could access their money. Daniel had found the perfect accomplice. After a week of gathering evidence, I called Patricia Winters. I met with her at her office in Georgetown, using the excuse of a doctor's appointment to explain my absence to Daniel. I brought copies of everything I'd found, the photos, the recordings, the financial documents. Patricia listened to it all, her expression growing increasingly grim. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and shook her head. "Mrs. Voss, This is one of the most calculated cases of financial and psychological abuse I've ever seen, she said. What your husband has been doing is illegal on multiple fronts: fraud, conspiracy, drugging you without proper medical justification, and Dr. Brennan's involvement makes it even worse. What do I do? I asked. We go to the police, she said. Today, right now, we take all of this evidence to a detective I know who specializes in domestic fraud cases. And we get you somewhere safe while they investigate. Will they believe me? I asked, and I hated the uncertainty in my voice. With this evidence, absolutely, Patricia said firmly. You've done everything right. You've documented everything, gathered proof, created a paper trail that can't be disputed. They'll believe you. We went to the police station that afternoon. Patricia's contact was Detective James Rourke, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and a kind but serious demeanor. We sat in an interview room, and I told him everything while Patricia laid out the evidence. Detective Rourke recorded my statement, asked detailed questions, and examined every piece of evidence carefully. When we finished, he looked at me with something like respect. Mrs. Voss, most people in your situation wouldn't have had the presence of mind to gather this kind of evidence, he said. You potentially saved your own life. If your husband had succeeded in having you committed, there's no telling how far he would have gone. The thought made me feel sick. We'll need a few days to build the case, Detective Rourke continued. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you don't go home. Is there somewhere safe you can stay? My sister's in North Carolina, I said. Good, go there. Tonight, if possible. We'll contact you when we're ready to make arrests. Patricia helped me pack a bag while Daniel was still at work. I took essential documents, my laptop, clothes, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. Then I left, locking the door of the house that no longer felt like home, and drove south to Rebecca's. I stayed with my sister for 2 weeks. Every day I called Detective Rourke for updates. The police were building their case carefully, interviewing people who knew Daniel and me, subpoenaing financial records, getting search warrants for Dr. Brennan's office. Finally, Detective Rourke called me. We're ready. We'll be making arrests tomorrow morning. Your husband and Dr. Brennan will both be taken into custody. The next morning, while I was sitting in Rebecca's kitchen drinking coffee, Daniel was arrested at his office. Dr. Brennan was arrested at his home. Simone Marshall was brought in for questioning as a potential accessory, though ultimately she wasn't charged. Apparently, she hadn't known the full extent of what Daniel was doing, though she'd certainly known he was planning to leave me and take my money. The trial took 7 months. Daniel hired an expensive defense attorney, and they tried every tactic they could think of. They claimed I'd fabricated the evidence, that the recordings were edited, that I was mentally unstable and had become paranoid and delusional. They tried to paint me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge for a simple affair. But the evidence was overwhelming. The pill bottles with altered dosages, the financial records showing systematic theft, the recordings of Daniel explicitly discussing his plans to have me committed so he could access my money, the emails and text messages between him and Simone, even the testimony from Dr. Brennan, who eventually agreed to testify against Daniel in exchange for a reduced sentence, confirming that Daniel had paid him to prescribe unnecessarily strong medications and to falsify records, building a case for my mental incompetence. Witnesses helped too. My editor at one of the magazines I wrote for testified that my work had been excellent and reliable until about 3 months ago, when it had suddenly declined dramatically, coinciding exactly with when I'd started taking the pills. Rebecca testified about the change she'd noticed in me, how different I'd sounded, how unlike myself. Even some of Daniel's colleagues testified that he'd been unusually interested in power of attorney laws and mental competency hearings in the months leading up to his plan. I testified too. I told the jury everything, from the beginning of the gaslighting, to the night I'd overheard his phone call to the week I'd spent gathering evidence. I looked Daniel in the eye while I spoke, and for the first time in months, I didn't look away. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, administering drugs without medical justification, financial abuse, and attempted false imprisonment. Daniel was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Dr. Brennan got 6 years and permanently lost his medical license. Daniel was also ordered to pay full restitution for all the money he'd stolen, plus damages for medical expenses and emotional distress. I got the house. I got my money back, every penny Daniel had taken, plus what he'd spent planning his new life with Simone. And I got my life back. But it wasn't easy. For months after the trial, I struggled with anxiety and trust issues. I started seeing a real therapist, Dr. Laura Chen, who specialized in trauma recovery from domestic abuse. She helped me understand that what Daniel had done wasn't just about money. It was about control, about trying to erase me as a person so completely that I'd cease to exist in any meaningful way. He tried to steal your mind, Dr. Chen told me in one of our sessions. He tried to make you doubt your own reality, your own sanity. That's one of the deepest violations a person can commit against another. She was right. The physical theft of money was terrible, but the psychological theft was worse. Daniel had tried to take away my sense of self, my confidence in my own perceptions, my belief in my own mind, and he'd almost succeeded. But I'd fought back. I'd trusted my instincts even when everything told me not to. I'd gathered evidence even when I was terrified. I'd survived. I sold the house in Reston. Too many bad memories. Too many rooms where I'd felt watched and monitored and trapped. I bought a small townhouse in Old Town Alexandria, a cozy place with brick walls and original hardwood floors and big windows that let in lots of light. I filled it with plants and books and art that I loved, creating a space that was entirely mine. I rebuilt my writing career slowly. The fog had lifted completely once I stopped taking the pills, and my mind felt sharp again, clear again. I took on new projects, started pitching to bigger publications, even began work on a book about financial abuse and how to recognize the warning signs. On a Sunday morning in late September, almost exactly 2 years after the night I'd stopped taking the pills, I was sitting on my small patio with a cup of coffee and the newspaper. The air was cool and crisp, autumn just beginning to creep in. My tomato plants were heavy with late-season fruit, and I could hear my neighbors laughing in their yard next door. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, drugged and confused and terrified, standing in her bedroom and making the split-second decision not to swallow those pills. The woman who trusted her instincts when everything told her not to. And I thought about the woman I was now, clear-headed and strong and free, sitting in her own home that no one else had any claim to. I didn't need revenge. Revenge was Daniel, sitting in a prison cell with years left on his sentence, his reputation destroyed, his career gone. That had happened without me needing to do anything but tell the truth. What I needed was to know that I could trust myself again, that my instincts were sound, that my mind was my own. And I did. I knew it with absolute certainty. A butterfly landed on the edge of my coffee cup, its wings opening and closing slowly in the morning sun. I watched it for a long moment, this small, delicate thing that had transformed itself completely, that had emerged from darkness into light. Then it flew away, and I smiled. I was free.